Good morning. It's Wednesday, January 21st, 2015. This is your morning edition on I-24 News with breaking news this morning. Very little information trickling in, but there seems to have been a suspected terrorist stabbing attack in Tel Aviv. That is where we're sitting right now, Jaffa, Tel Aviv. And 3 people are reportedly injured in a stabbing attack in Tel Aviv in a bus station. Let's go first to Mickey Rosenfeld, police chief, Israeli police chief, with the latest information. Mickey, what do we know so far?
Good morning. What we know until now is just over 20 minutes ago, a Palestinian terrorist carried out a stabbing attack on a 40 bus on the Ma'ariv bridge, which is one of the central places in Tel Aviv. Emergency teams arrived at the scene, including special police patrol units. Inside the bus itself, we know of two Israelis that were injured. We know of a further 6 that were also injured lightly. All taken to hospital, the Ishilov hospital in the Tel Aviv area.
Right.
Our police units, in fact, chased the suspect, and he was shot in the leg and is now being questioned by police. But what we've confirmed and what we believe is that's the terrorist who carried out the attack this morning in Tel Aviv. We're continuing to search the area. There's also heightened security in the area of Tel Aviv at the moment.
When you say that the assailant, the suspect, what do we know about him so far? Palestinian from Nablus, is that correct? That's the initial reports that we're reading?
What we know until now is that he is Palestinian. We're obviously questioning him at the moment. He's also received medical treatment after he was shot at the nearby scene where he fled the area. But what we did confirm until now is a terrorist attack. And obviously we're dealing with the people that have been injured until now in and around the bus area.
And this is the bus area. It's a central bus area in Tel Aviv. A little bit more details, though. I know that we have very little information, but as we said, this is in Tel Aviv, a central bus station, and a stabbing attack. And this is a man who, came out at a soldier. Is that correct as well?
What we know until now is on the 40 bus, which was on the bridge, the Ma'ariv bridge, which is a central area in Tel Aviv. That's where the stabbing incident took place. The suspect then fled the bus and was chased by police special patrol units that arrived at the scene. The situation is under control, but obviously at this moment in time, we're continuing to search the area to make sure there are no further terrorists around and to keep the situation under control. We've heightened security in the Tel Aviv area at the moment.
Definitely. And just following through on that, though, as you said, heightened security right now in Tel Aviv. I know this is very preliminary, and we have very little detail about the suspected terror attack in Tel Aviv. Was there any kind of intel? Was there heightened security? Well, not heightened security, but any kind of intel or any kind of warnings leading up to this event? Or are we looking at, and I'm asking for your educated opinion, does this seem to be a lone wolf attack at this point?
That's something that obviously we're looking into. There was no specific information that there was going to be an attack in Tel Aviv this morning. We'll obviously have to look how he arrived in the Tel Aviv area, if he came in illegally into Israel or whether he passed through one of the different checkpoints and came in for work purposes or medical purposes and then took advantage of the cards and having the possibility of coming inside Israel. But all that is part of the ongoing investigation. At this moment in time, the emphasis is making sure that there won't be any further attacks in the Tel Aviv area this morning.
Okay. Mickey Rosenfeld, Israeli police spokesperson, thank you very much for joining us, discussing this very, very preliminary reports and information we have about the breaking news, as we said, in Tel Aviv. A short while ago, 20 minutes ago, approximately, 2 Israelis. Now some reports are saying 3 are in serious condition after being stabbed while on a bus in Tel Aviv, and that is in a central area, actually quite close to where we're sitting in southern Tel Aviv, being stabbed in serious condition by an assailant who supposedly is a Palestinian from Nablus. Again, all of this is very initial information that is trickling in right now. 20 minutes ago, according to police, the assailant was shot by security personnel while fleeing the scene. We just spoke to Mickey Rosenfeld, the police chief of the Israeli police, saying that the assailant was shot in his leg and is being questioned right now by police as to how he entered Tel Aviv. As Mickey Rosenfeld, the police chief of Israel, said, illegally. We are now joined on the phone by Amir Oren, senior defense analyst for Haaretz newspaper. Amir, good morning to you.
Good morning, Yael.
Very initial reports that we just heard from Mickey Rosenfeld, the police chief in Israel, about this attack. But in Tel Aviv, this is something that is, it's sadly to say, this is something that is more related to Jerusalem. This is something that feels, and I'm asking you out loud, like the lone wolf attacks that we saw in Jerusalem approximately 2 months ago. Do you think we're looking at a similar wave as such in the metropolitan that many will claim is actually the social, capital of Israel?
Yes, it does seem to fit the same pattern, but it didn't happen only in Jerusalem. Last November, some 2 months ago, it happened next to a train station here, not too far from that area. And the pattern seems to be that on transport, public transport, such as a train or a bus, a lone perpetrator armed with makeshift weapons. These are not explosives, which means that the terror organizations have not been able to supply their personnel with vests or other sorts of explosives to detonate on a bus and cause 10, 15, 20 casualties, as was the norm
Right.
in the 90s. So this is the bright side, one might say. However, this particular bus and this particular route would lead to the Kiryat, the main IDF base, and many soldiers, conscripts, this time of the morning are riding to their jobs in the base on this particular bus as well as on many others. So apparently the attack was timed in order to cause maximum harm in a specific location at a specific time and perhaps aimed at a specific target.
No, I mean, a very good point. Again, of course, we're speaking just on theory, but as you mentioned, this is a bus that's heading to the Kiryat, which is the Israeli military actually headquarters in Tel Aviv. One can describe it as such. And when you said it doesn't look like the 90s, but if this is a lone wolf attack, this is something that is actually becoming, if it's a modus operandi, it seems to be easy to get to bus stations also in Tel Aviv.
Well, bus stations, restaurants, just the streets, it's impossible to defend any particular point. And bear in mind, when shopping malls became the target and the security guards were positioned outside them, the long lines where the checkpoint has been stationed was itself a target. So you can never really protect civilians walking about their innocent business, and you cannot deter these lone wolves. And the big question is whether this is going to go on as we are on the eve of elections. And just to remind our listeners and viewers, in 1992, a similar attack in Bat Yam, where this bus came from, on a girl named Helena Rapp, helped to swing the election from Yitzhak Shamir to Yitzhak Rabin.
So that's a very valid point, and we're speaking obviously, we are looking at 60 days before the Israeli elections, within the 60 days of the Israeli elections, and we're seeing, the security situation up north that is being tense because of a presumed attack that is referred to Israel in Syria on Hezbollah affiliates, and now this in Tel Aviv, so security becoming the main point of the agenda. Amir Owen, we would love to actually speak with you a little bit later on, possibly within this broadcast, as more information comes about the suspected terror attack in Tel Aviv, the major metropolitan in Israel. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'd like to go right now to Ali Waked, I-24 News senior Middle East analyst, also joining us on the phone. As we mentioned, this is preliminary information about a suspected terror attack in Tel Aviv on a bus station in southern Tel Aviv, a bus line, I believe it is the 21 number bus, as Amir Owen just mentioned, leading to the Kiryat, which is the Israeli military headquarters, so to speak, in Tel Aviv. Three Israelis are in serious conditions. Ali Waked, senior Middle East analyst, with us on the phone. Very preliminary information, maintain that it's an assailant from Nablus, so definitely, we're looking at possibly a Palestinian. Any reactions coming out of the Palestinian media at this point? And following that, your educated opinion, are we looking again at just lone wolf attacks?
No, for the moment, no reaction. The Palestinians are checking who is this guy and his identity and whether he is connected to any of the organization. For the moment, neither Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or any other Palestinian group did claim responsibility. I guess that in the coming hours or even minutes, we are going to see Hamas and Islamic Jihad blessing the attack and describing it as a natural reaction, natural response from the Palestinians to what is happening in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank or even in the Negev with the Bedouins.
Right.
But for the moment, no official reclamation from the Palestinians, and the Palestinian Authority security services are looking for the connections that the guy might have with any of the Palestinian organizations.
With the Palestinian organization, that's the point that I want to touch with you again. When we're looking at this, and again, I'm mentioning the details because this has happened approximately 30 minutes ago on a bus in Tel Aviv, the suspected terrorist stabbing attack. But if a lone wolf, as you said, we are not, I'm theorizing here that the Palestinian organizations are no longer sending people out. This is actually people taking the initiative into their own hands.
Yeah, but Yael, when we have this accumulation of lone wolves operating together, it is becoming more than a phenomenon. It is becoming a kind of a system.
Right.
And we're seeing the Palestinian organizations, mainly the Islamic Jihad and Hamas, encouraging the Palestinians to take such individual and private initiatives in a moment where the organizations themselves have, for the moment, no interest to escalate the situation. Hamas, for its own reasons, it doesn't want to endanger the situation in the Gaza Strip where he is ruling. The Islamic Jihad, because of the same understanding with Hamas, is not carrying out these attacks, and the Palestinian Authority, of course, that is trying to do all its best that the situation, mainly in the West Bank, will stay relatively calm. So this kind of operations allow the Palestinians to, on one hand, enhance and encourage these the individuals to launch such attacks, but stay separate and distance from the attacks themselves. From the attacks themselves.
Ali Waqid, senior Middle East analyst of I-24 News. Once again, we'll probably check in with you later throughout the broadcast as more information comes about this suspected terror attack. As I said, we're saying suspected, but Israeli Police Chief Miki Rosenfeld told I-24 News in this morning broadcast that this seems to be an assailant from Nablus, a Palestinian from Nablus. He has been stopped. He's been actually shot by Israeli police on the scene, but is wounded and being interrogated just now by the security forces in Tel Aviv. As you mentioned, approximately 3 people injured in serious conditions as information begins to trickle in throughout the morning about this terror attack in Tel Aviv, stabbing attack. We will bring you more information about it as we move along. Now, this fateful day, actually, is the Morning Post, or several hours after the American president, Barack Obama, gave his second-to-last State of the Union address. Only a few hours ago, and President Obama gave his 6th address to the nation, an anticipated event worldwide. Now, although the bulk of the speech in the United States focused on domestic policy, it was clear from the onset that when it comes to world affairs, the American president had to present a clear strategy on how to deal with burning international issues, such as the battle against ISIS, the controversial nuclear talks with Iran, the failure to deal with the civil war in Syria, and what appears to be a growing international terror threat. Very fateful line this morning as we're looking at a possible terror attack in Tel Aviv, but a terror threat under his watch internationally. Critics this morning will argue that no clear strategy was presented, that the American president spoke in slogans, and that when it comes to foreign policy, the only clear-cut strategy he issued was his ability to veto any congressional sanctions on Iran. To break down the speech and try and make sense of it, we are joined in studio by Associate Professor of Political Science at Tel Aviv University, Dr. Udi Zomer. Dr. Zomer, good morning to you.
Good morning, glad to be here.
By our one and only, good to have you here as well. By our one and only Tony Grant to look at the media coverage of this speech. Good morning, good to have you with us.
Good morning to you.
And of course, before we break it down, we'd love to go to Washington, D.C. first, where we're joined by Times of Israel, Washington, D.C. correspondent Rebecca Shimoni-Story. Rebecca, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Great to have you with us. First to you, because we're going to deal mostly with foreign policy, though. Initial reactions in D.C. in that what is the hub of the political heartbeat in the United States. First reactions to the State of the Union address of President Obama.
Well, of course, the response to the address depends on who you ask. Hillary Clinton immediately sent out a tweet highlighting Obama's focus on the middle class, on economic policy, on kind of social issues, economic issues, which really were the bulk of his speech this year. Some other responses from other people did mention, for instance, his focus on sanctions legislation for Iran, his focus on ISIL, a certain amount of mention of his discussion of the phrase combat troops in Afghanistan and whether it's fair to say that really there are no troops in combat roles in Afghanistan right now,
right,
and other international topics. But really most of the political response, including most of the Republicans' reactions to the speech, have really focused on the domestic issues, which are at the heart of the upcoming elections.
No, definitely. And as mentioned, the one clear strategy Obama presented, and Rebecca, you're staying with us, to the Republican Congress, as far as I'm concerned, when I looked at the speech this morning and the slivers of sound bites that were coming out, was the promise, or rather the threat, to veto any new sanctions imposed on Iran, as those will hinder a deal in the works with the Shiite Islamic State. So let's first, to all of us here, hear what President Obama had to say when it comes to Iran and the negotiations about its nuclear capability.
Between now and this spring, we have a chance to negotiate a comprehensive agreement that prevents a nuclear-armed Iran, secures America and our allies, including Israel, while avoiding yet another Middle East conflict. There are no guarantees that negotiations will succeed, and I keep all options on the table to prevent a nuclear Iran. But new sanctions passed by this Congress at this moment in time will all but guarantee that diplomacy fails, alienating America from its allies, making it harder to maintain sanctions, and ensuring that Iran starts up its nuclear program again. It doesn't make sense. And that's why I will veto any new sanctions bill that threatens to undo this progress.
Still with us in D.C., obviously, Rebecca and Dr. Zomar and Tony Grant in studio. Dr. Zomar, I'd like to start with you. When President Obama says that any kind of, clearly he's speaking to a predominantly Republican Congress, and lawmakers, Republican lawmakers who are trying to push new sanctions on Iran. I have to mention things in advance. These are the last 2 years of President Obama in office. He's going to try and make legacy. When he says that sanctions are going to alienate our allies, our international allies, to me it sounds as almost he's referring to Iran as an ally already, and that deal is already set in place. Well, it's going to happen whether people want it or not.
Well, I think for Obama, we have to remember that Obama so far in his 6 years in office vetoed bills coming from Congress only twice. In the last month, since the new Republican Congress took office, or even less than a month, he threatened to veto 5 times. So there seems to be a new politics taking shape in Washington. We might be willing to call that veto bargaining. Okay, so there's a bargaining whether veto is going to take place or not. With respect to Iran, I think that for Obama, I don't think he considers the Iranians allies, at least yet. Although there seems to be a certain level of maybe indirect cooperation in places such as northern Iraq and Syria, but we put that aside for now. But I think for him, the idea of allies is the notion that Obama's foreign policy since day one was based on coalitions, regional coalitions, international coalitions, and the idea of sanctions that would hamper such coalitions is what Obama is talking about when he talks about the possibility of alienating allies.
Of alienating allies. Still, when we're listening to those, to me that sounded like the only statement, or should we say a soundbite as we call it in the business, that basically puts out a strategy. And Tony, before I go to you, Rebecca, in D.C., and you're still with us, when he spoke about Iran, are there reactions from the Republican body of lawmakers to that specific bit? Because I think the Iranian issue is not just something that interests everybody in the region, and we're sitting here right now, but as I said before, it seems to us and to everybody that he's gung-ho on setting this as part of the agenda for the next 2 years to get that deal in place.
Well, I think that first of all, it's important to note that the sanctions legislation that is most likely to come up in the coming weeks is actually a bipartisan bill. It's co-sponsored by Mark Kirk, a Republican of Illinois, and Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat of New Jersey. And in fact, even within his own party, Obama has a certain amount of discontent regarding his strategy on Iran. So first of all, yes, will it be easier for these kinds of bills to make their way through a Republican-controlled Congress? Absolutely. But is this simply a Republican opposition to Obama's Iran strategy? No, I think that there's support on both sides of the aisle, albeit stronger on the Republican side. But I think that the bipartisan nature of the opposition is important to note. I also think that it's very important to note that the reaction that we saw tonight from the Republicans in general was one that was maybe toned down in its oppositional nature from previous states of the Union that I've seen. I thought that they were much more collegial in their disagreement than they've been in previous years. I think that that was somewhat notable. And I do think that when you played that soundbite, one thing that you might have noticed if you compared it to other moments in the speech, that the applause was a bit dampened, even relative to other cases in which were most of the applause lines. I believe I heard there were 80 applause lines altogether in the speech. I admit I wasn't noting. But in comparison to other applause lines, this applause line got markedly less applause.
Less applause. You know, that would be a hard hurdle to jump over. And Tony, I'm wondering out loud with you, because you cover press for us daily, and I don't know if there were any reactions already to that notion on Iran, to that bit of on Iran when it comes to local press or even the Arab media. But that's something I think that's on the minds of anybody covering the region, isn't it?
Certainly on the minds of journalists covering the region. But as the correspondent there said, I think in terms of domestic American politics, the economic situation and the sort of the taxing the super rich sort of that element, that was especially a lot of fodder we saw in the Republican response from Senator Joni Ernst. You know, that's the official sort of oppositional view, and those economic themes are really front and center.
Rather than Iran or.
But as far as the Iran, I mean, in terms of the coalition that Obama mentions, you know, the critics are going to say, okay, well, that's the sort of strategy of leading from behind. You know, where is it taking us or not taking us? So that's a common refrain I think we're seeing also in the media.
No, and that's a very valid point, because when it comes to the coalition, and that leads us straight to the battle on terrorism, the battle on ISIS, the battle on terror throughout the globe, as it seems. President Obama, I think many people were waiting for also a clear strategy when it comes to the battle against ISIS and what to do with Iraq. And this is what the American president had to say when it comes to the Islamic State and security.
We stand united with people around the world who've been targeted by terrorists, from a school in Pakistan to the streets of Paris. We will continue to hunt down terrorists and dismantle their networks, and we reserve the right to act unilaterally, as we have done relentlessly since I took office, to take out terrorists who pose a direct threat to us and our allies. In Iraq and Syria, American leadership, including our military power, is stopping ISIL's advance. Instead of getting dragged into another ground war in the Middle East, we are leading a broad coalition, including Arab nations, to degrade and ultimately destroy this terrorist group.
And that was the American President Barack Obama yesterday in the State of the Union address. But we are breaking again for initial reports. Again, these are just initial reports of an additional stabbing in Jerusalem now. As we mentioned earlier this morning, we opened the broadcast approximately 30 minutes ago. There was a suspected terror attack, stabbing attack in Tel Aviv. 3 people seriously injured. An assailant, a Palestinian from Nablus, shot in the leg, being interrogated by security forces in Tel Aviv right now. But now we are getting initial reports also of an additional stabbing in Jerusalem. The preliminary reports say that the Nablus Gate, the old city, that is where the suspected latest attack occurred. Details will follow as we continue this broadcast. 9 people in total receiving treatment right now after the Tel Aviv attack. As we mentioned, 2 attacks this morning that we are getting reports on. One in Tel Aviv, a stabbing attack in a bus station in the southern part of the city. And again, reports saying that the assailant was shot in the leg and is being interrogated. When it comes to Jerusalem, really initial reports trickling in of another suspected stabbing attack near Nablus Gate in Jerusalem. In Tel Aviv, 9 people in total are receiving treatment right now. 3 victims of the Tel Aviv stabbing attack are in serious condition. According to the updated report, the victims are being treated in Ichilov and Tel HaShomer hospitals. Those are hospitals in Tel Aviv. And members of the Israel Prison Service accompanying prisoners to a Tel Aviv courthouse stopped the terrorist. Channel 2 reported, Israeli Channel 2, stopped the terrorist, shot him in the leg. And as Mickey Rosenfeld, the chief of police in Israel, mentioned earlier in this broadcast, The assailant, a Palestinian from Nablus, is currently being interrogated by security forces. But we are going to continue right now quickly with the American president and dealing still with terror. With me in studio is Dr. Zomer. As we heard Obama first talk about, we stand united with people around the world who've been targeted by terrorists. What a fateful line this morning. From a school in Pakistan, the president says, to the streets of Paris, we will continue to hunt down terrorists and dismantle their networks, and we reserve the right to act unilaterally. This sounds like a great slogan. What does it mean?
I think that the game that Obama is playing now, last night was probably the last time where he had the ability to address 30 million Americans at one time, okay? And he is trying to establish his legacy both vis-a-vis the other party and vis-a-vis his own party. Vis-a-vis his own party is the kind of domestic politics that have been mentioned here, what he called middle-class economics, okay, and
right.
The idea of taxing the rich, etc. And the idea of fighting terror is one way in which he's going to challenge the Republicans in Congress. So what he said with respect to ISIL, okay, with respect to Iran, he was very clear that all options are still on the table and Israel is protected, etc. Okay, with respect to ISIL,
and that he's going to veto any kind of
exactly.
sanctions. Okay.
And with respect to ISIL, what he said was that he did whatever he was able to do as chief executive to fight terrorism in Iraq and Syria, but he challenged Congress to pass legislation that supports this effort. If this is and this is something that Republicans are going to be very challenging for them to circumvent and to overlook.
To circumvent and overlook, but what does that really mean? And Rebecca's still with us from D.C. really quickly. Does that spell, challenging, any kind of orders when it comes to Iraq? Boots on the ground, what does it mean? I think we're all wondering in the Middle East. What do you think it means?
I think many people are also wondering here in Washington because for a couple of months now, the assumption has been that there hasn't been an authorization for the use of military force necessary for the kind of engagement that we've been seeing in Iraq and will probably be seen to a certain extent in terms of training and supporting the, quote, moderate opposition members in Syria. So the request for an authorization in the use of military force is an interesting statement to make at this time. I think to a certain extent it was a call for bipartisanship in an area in which there is a certain amount of agreement in the need to confront the threat posed by ISIL.
By ISIL. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us from D.C. Tony Grant and Dr. Zomer with me in studio. As we mentioned, an attack in Tel Aviv. That was breaking news this morning. The suspected attack in Jerusalem appears to be not related to any type of terror activity. But in Tel Aviv, a short while ago, 3 people stabbed, 9 people in total being treated for injuries. The assailant, a Palestinian from Nablus, being interrogated by police right now in Tel Aviv, a stabbing attack this morning. We will be back shortly and update you throughout the broadcast. First, the morning headlines. Good morning, welcome back. I-24 News Morning Edition on this January 21st. Thank you very much. Breaking news from here in Israel. A man known to police stabbed several people on a bus in Tel Aviv. Some 10 people are injured, at least 4 seriously, while several more are in shock, according to initial reports. The attacker, said to be a 20-year-old from Tulkarem, was shot and neutralized near the scene by prison guards who happened to be at the Ma'ariv Junction. That's one of the main junctions in the Israeli metropolitan. The driver reportedly scuffled with the attacker. Police say the situation now is under control. In an earlier conversation in this broadcast with Mickey Rosenfeld, police chief of the Israeli police, he mentioned that, again, heightened security in and around Tel Aviv. Security forces are looking for more assailants, but this, at this point, seems to be a lone wolf attack, as we have seen thus far in Jerusalem and other areas in Israel over the course of the last several months. As mentioned, this is an attack in Tel Aviv, a stabbing attack earlier this morning, approximately half an hour ago. We will give you more details about this attack in Israel as we find out more about it. As we mentioned, the situation seems to have been neutralized, and we move on and back to the news that's predominantly dominating, and I'm sure that some of my colleagues here in studio will not agree with me, but is dominating the international agenda this morning, and that is the American president's State of the Union address given a few hours ago in the United States. Barack Obama giving his second to last State of the Union address, his sixth in total right now, 2 years before he leaves office. And before we broke off for headlines, we had the pleasure to discuss with Dr. Zomer from Tel Aviv University, joining me still in studio, Tony Grant, our one and only, and of course, former Israeli consul to New York, Mr. Alon Pinkas. Always a pleasure to have you in studio, as hard as it is for me to get you to sit down here right next to me. But that said, Rebecca Story, also from Washington, D.C., still with us, covering this speech. I want to touch back on security again. I want to go back to the battle against terrorism that President Obama mentioned yesterday, as we had so little time to touch on at the first bulk of this show. The President said, "We stand united with people around the world who've been targeted by terrorists, from a school in Pakistan, I'm quoting again, to the streets in Paris. We will continue to hunt down terrorists, dismantle their networks." Mr. Pinkas, here in studio, a big, Barack Obama advocator. Every time I have the pleasure of sitting with you, what does that mean?
Exactly what it means, what it sounds
like. But
like.
Doesn't it sound like a slogan? Doesn't it sound like a slogan at a time when we're looking in the international arena that is having such a hard time to deal with terrorism that is either homegrown, that is either spreading in Iraq in a way that Air Force strikes do not seem to be combating, right, and that we're waiting for the American president to give a strategy, a clear-cut strategy on how to combat it, which last year there were arguments that no strategy was given out, and it feels the same this year.
Well, let me put it this way. First of all, hidden inside the State of the Union address was a request from Congress to declare war on ISIL. It's right in there. It wasn't highlighted, it wasn't heralded, but it's in there. He basically asked Congress to declare war. That leads to number two. There is no strategy. The strategy is to be agile, to be flexible. There is no coherent strategy because the challenges are different, and the challenges keep on metaphorphing themselves. Right. ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Europe are different things. They're all manifestations of the same phenomenon, exactly, but they are different things. And that leads to the third thing. If you look at the polls conducted immediately after the State of the Union address, 81%, on a CNN poll, 81% thought very favorably of the speech, and 91%, when asked whether they agree with the president that he will veto further sanctions on Iran, agreed. Now, why am I bringing this into the terror argument
That's good that you
discussion? Because this is a post-U.S. superpower president. This is a president that is both leaning on public opinion in the U.S. and derives his ideas from public opinion, in the sense that this is a president that is taking America to an era in which it understands, recognizes, and acknowledges that there's a limit to its force, that there are challenges that it cannot overcome merely by a show or display of force, and a president that thinks that believes that this is an ongoing thing that requires international cooperation, not the usual let's call 911 or let's call 100 as it is in Israel. Right. Call Washington every time there's an international crisis.
But that said, you say that inside, and I tend to agree, and I'm seeing it now, you do say that inside the State of the Union address yesterday, there's a call for war from Congress.
Yes.
That he's asking them to approve war.
Right.
I'm going to actually, we're going to touch on this, like all of us here. Rebecca, what?
Well, in order for that to actually be true, the ISIL has to be an actual as opposed to just a so-called state. So I have to beg to differ with that assessment. I think it's playing politics with the Congress.
I also tend to agree, because for Congress to declare war, last time Congress did that was in the Second World War. It never happened in Vietnam or in Korea, and any of those. What I do think, where I agree with Alon, is the notion that America's strategy is being flexible. I just want to remind you that in the State of the Union in January of 2014, nobody was thinking about ISIS. No, ISIS didn't have a name, or three names, right? ISIS, ISIL, and IS, or whatever.
Yeah.
So in a sense, the challenges that the United States is facing in the Middle East and in the region are changing as we speak. I mean, in the morning of the State of the Union address yesterday, there was a takeover of the presidential palace in Sana'a in Yemen, right? So things are changing so quickly that I agree that the kind of terrorist, counter-terrorist strategy of the United States is being very flexible. One more thing, I think that Obama, both with respect to domestic politics and to a large extent with respect to foreign policy, is doing what American presidents who are unable to work through Congress often do, which is called going public. He goes public in a sense. He's trying to, and this is something that FDR was probably most known for, but other presidents such as Reagan and others have used in the past, which is going through the public. If you have public support for something, even if you have a Congress that is controlled by the opposition party, you are more likely to get your policies through, which is very important for a lame duck in his last 2 years in office.
The argument of being a lame duck, obviously, by many things. Rebecca, would you agree that there's a call for war from Congress at that point? Because, as I mentioned to you before, everybody in this region, we're looking to hear about two things: strategies about Iran, strategies about ISIL. That's why we're touching on it again. Is it a call to Congress to basically declare war?
Well, I think ultimately, and this isn't the first time that we've seen the president request an authorization of the use of military force from Congress. We saw it also concerning Syria earlier. I think that the questions about the strategic use of requesting an AUMF have become very interesting during this administration. Part of the suggestion is to say, no, this isn't just the president deciding to put more boots on the ground. This is really everybody coming together and coming to a certain policy consensus here. The question is, of course, is there a consensus, and for what? The U.S. has been using a certain amount of military force, obviously, against ISIS in recent months with airstrikes. And the question is, what would be achieved through an additional AUMF? What would be the expectation? And is an AUMF, as people feared when one was requested for Syria, really a gateway to putting a lot more boots on the ground in places that the majority of American people do not support right now having troops?
Having troops on the ground, but that, many people in this region and analysts that we sit with almost every morning, Middle East analysts, say that nothing in terms of Iraq and when it comes to ISIL will be gained or they will be dismantled unless boots on the ground are being placed eventually somewhere down the line. But moving on with this speech, and Alon Pinkas, you mentioned Iran again, we discussed it. It seems to be a clear-cut, and I'm interested to hear your opinion about it, a clear-cut idea for the American president to go ahead and finalize a deal as such. We discussed earlier that the one clear strategy that came out of that speech was basically him saying that he's going to veto any sanctions that Congress tries to push, and that was the most clear-cut thing that I heard.
Right.
Is that a deal that's already set in place in your mind? I've asked the other people here.
Yes, but before that, it's the second clearest thing in the speech.
What was the first?
The conspicuous absence of any mention of the so-called Israeli-Palestinian peace process.
Ah, very true, actually.
It wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
That's why I was late. I was reading the speech 7 times to look for it. Seriously. I don't know if there is a deal in the making with Iran. What I do know is that the president is very persistent and consistent in terms, the president and his people, that includes Secretary of State Kerry and National Security Advisor Rice, they are very consistent in asking Congress not to legislate new sanctions. And that includes both Republicans and Democrats, particularly Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey, who's a Democrat. The president is making a very logical case. He's saying if you impose sanctions, you're making sure you're guaranteeing that we won't reach a deal. Right now, we're on the verge of a deal. There's an argument to be made, though, that the president is being conned by the Iranians again and again. That the Iranians are not seeking any kind of disruption or breakdown of the talks, nor are they seeking a deal.
Rather,
they want extensions and further extensions and further extensions to the point that they will reach what former Defense Minister and Prime Minister Ehud Barak calls a zone of immunity. I think that this is something that Obama will have to take care of before he leaves office, which is exactly 2 years from today. Well, yes, today, in fact. But today, the new president will be in his first day in office after the inauguration.
No, it's fascinating on that point, and when we're looking at, but I want to touch back on something that you mentioned here, and I think that the Iranian issue seems to be part of his legacy, and there's a point to be made that maybe he's being played by the Iranians, but when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations, which it's almost ironic to even refer to them as such, to a lack thereof, so to speak, that was not mentioned in the speech at all. Rebecca, still with us from D.C., just really quickly to you, any reactions to that, or, is D.C. as many in this region, including many people here, have they also given up on that process?
Well, I think it's to be anticipated in a State of the Union address that part of what you try to do is to talk about your policy achievements and not your policy I'll gently call them non-achievements. And certainly 8 months worth of negotiations that led to nothing at best, and perhaps the escalations that we've seen recently would certainly be a policy non-achievement that you would not want to highlight in what one tweeter called a 60-minute long press release. So I don't think it's a 60-minute long scripted. It was a wonderful line. But I do think that it's to be expected that last year we were still in the midst of talks. And so it would be worth mentioning, and this year we're not in the midst of talks, and so it would not be worth mentioning. But I do think that it is funny that last year I went back and looked at my headline last year for the State of the Union, and it was Obama vows to veto sanctions bills against Iran. And at that time as well, we were dealing with a very similar bill by Senators Menendez and Kirk. And right now, it's kind of back to the future.
Back to the future.
A year
in
later,
that respect.
it's the same headline.
Rebecca, thank you. And as we are sitting here in the studio and discussing the Palestinian-Israeli lack of a process, which is the only way to refer to it, updating yet again that in Tel Aviv this morning, a suspected terror attack, a stabbing attack that injured 3 people seriously. Those are the initial reports that we're getting. 9 people in total are being treated for injuries. We have some new picture coming in from Israeli, actually Channel 2, new pictures from the scene of injured people being taken to hospital, local regional hospitals in the Tel Aviv area. It's the biggest metropolitan in Israel. On the scene is Danny Swibel, I-24 News correspondent. Danny, you're with us on the phone. What is the situation there? Heightened security in and around?
Well, the roads are definitely still closed off. Earlier, as we had said, a Palestinian man believed to be from Nablus or Tulkarem entered the bus 40 in southeast Tel Aviv, stabbed several passengers. Now, the interesting thing is we're not exactly sure of the 9 who were reported injured, how serious they are. We had earlier reports that 4 were seriously injured, 4 lightly. Now, when they say lightly, the security forces are not sure if that means they're in shock or they're actually part of the stabbing.
Right.
I talked to people at Ichilov Hospital who said that 2 of the people who were in critical condition are believed to be older people. The perpetrator himself was shot by police in the leg, apprehended, and we're waiting to hear more about the latest in what we are getting reports of is that this is a series of the wolf attacks that had occurred earlier this year.
No, definitely is. And as we mentioned, this seems to be a lone wolf attack. At this point, we have little information, preliminary information trickling in. Also, is that the assailant has been shot by police. The assailant, supposedly from Tulkarem, a Palestinian, shot by police and is being interrogated. Again, this is an attack in Tel Aviv approximately an hour ago in one of the main junctions on Mariv Junction, where a bus station that heads to the Kiryat, that's one of the Israeli military headquarters, actually the military headquarters, so to speak, in Tel Aviv. And throughout the morning, we will be updating you when it comes to information coming out of the scene. As we said, 3 people injured, severely, 9 people being treated for stabbing wounds or for shock. We don't know. The assailant in the hands of police, and Tel Aviv in heightened security mode as of this morning. But as we move back to the studio, do stay with us. We're going to go first to some headlines, update you about the attack in Tel Aviv, and then be back. Thank you for staying with us. Good morning, I-24 News Morning Edition, January 21st. Thank you again for reminding me, because that is what I live for, to come and sit here with Tony Grant, who is the human clock who keeps me in check, and Ruthie Sinai, senior I-24 News editor, to keep both of us in check. Tony.
Yes.
With the, I'm going to mention
important headlines.
Yeah, important headlines of the day really quickly. This morning, approximately an hour ago, a stabbing incident, a terror attack, so it seems, in a Tel Aviv bus station. We will update you throughout this block. But now, the headlines you missed while scanning the news. And as we said, we'll take you back to that scene shortly. Yes, Tony.
Okay, well, we talk about lone wolf terror attacks, and we also have pack of wolves, which is what ISIS, I guess you could call. And just look at this picture, awful one to look at, from Asahi Shimbun, which of course is a major Japanese newspaper. The Japanese basically saying it's Japanese outrage. It's the so-called classic ISIS video is showing these 2 Japanese hostages. The clock apparently is ticking on a ransom demand for some $200 million that the hostage taker hostage takers have demanded from Japan, and Prime Minister Abe has indicated that he will, do his best to try to save the hostages, one of whom is a Japanese freelance journalist. But again, who knows what's going on behind the scenes or not? But this is something that is very much in progress.
We know that in the past there have been negotiations and money transferred to the terror group.
Quietly sometimes.
Quietly, that we never hear in the press, that comes about only after the fact. Abe, who was recently here in the Middle East.
He was in Israel until last night.
Until last night, again, and this came out with this video. And you mentioned very rightfully so at the beginning that sadly, and I think Ruthie will agree with me as well, that those images are becoming so generic, are becoming almost, part of the routine of our daily news feed.
Yeah. And with Japan, of course, has largely been out of the picture, and this is bringing them right, to the front page. And again, for Japan especially, a very pacifist tradition for a long time now. Again, this is something that they just do not want to deal with.
Although under Abe, it's becoming increasingly less pacifist.
Correct. And this also, an incident like this is raising the foreign policy profile. It can't
even
not.
More, and the attempt in looking at this ISIS reach, specifically when we see these horrific pictures of hostages, is sweeping now the entire world. It's a problem for the entire world.
Absolutely.
And yet to be dealt with in any strategic way.
I hate to say this, but it's almost become branded. These orange suits, the black.
No, that's what I thought this morning. We saw that it becomes, I don't want to say numbness, but we're getting used to these images, and that's the frightening thought.
Yeah. So, and Obama talked about, the efforts to get rid of this scourge, but let's see what happens. Time will tell. Also, we can't forget that the Syrian civil war is something that has not gone away. And had the Daily Star Beirut here talking about the Syria regime airstrikes killed at least 39 people. This was apparently yesterday in the northern part of the country. Apparently reported barrel bombing, which is, of course, a horrific technique, for lack of a better word. And again, this is slipping between the cracks, but this is happening on an almost daily basis.
I'm so glad you mentioned this, because it's something that I'm saying this, that I missed at the beginning of this broadcast when we discussed the State of the Union address yesterday of President Obama, when he was talking about giving, supporting moderate forces, rebels fighting Assad. But this thing has been going on for over 3 years. Ruthie, correct me if I'm wrong, almost 3.5 years.
Yeah.
We're looking at staggering numbers of 250,000, if not more, dead civilians.
And there's a certain numbness to it as well.
Completely.
But again, I guess you could say it's not just Obama, but global policy failures really to get this thing resolved and move forward. On so many fronts, it's so complicated. But in the meantime, civilians and kids are paying the price. So we're seeing
daily. Yes.
Okay, moving on. Of course, same region, ours. This is, of course, a lot of talk in the Israeli press. Times of Israel said that according to an Israeli TV report, that the alleged, if you will, strike on Sunday night had targeted Hezbollah bid to set up missile bases in the Golan, the Syrian Golan. So without getting into it too much, there's some geopolitical stuff going on with that, which we could talk about for hours. And it relates, let's see, what do I have next? Take it to Argentina, actually.
Yes, nice connection. I see where you're heading with that.
Yeah. This is from Clarin, big paper in Buenos Aires. The death of Nisman, who is the Argentina's crusading prosecutor. Alberto Nisman found dead Sunday. They're saying that the officials are rushing to confirm it as a suicide. However, they said that instigation has not been ruled out. Now, again, this is something that is definitely not going away. We know that he was about to testify at an Argentine congressional hearing about the purported Hezbollah-Iran link to the 1994 bombing of the Jewish Center. And of course, Imad Mugnier, I think Mugnier, was implicated in the organization of that. His son, one of the prominent Hezbollah operatives, if you will, who was apparently slain in Sunday's attack. The link here is being made. The Daily Beast says quite openly, or asks quite openly,
no, it's
quote, check this out.
Yes.
If we have it. Did Iran murder Argentina's crusading prosecutor? So again,
that's coming from the Daily Beast.
The Daily Beast. This is something that we have things again, this is we talked about this as a Hollywood movie, but it's still reality, and what's going on here is politically
and what's fascinating. I mean,
huge.
One can call it fascinating. It's the Iranian connection. It's the fact also that in the presumed Israeli attack that we're referring to that Israel has not claimed responsibility, but foreign reports, and everybody in the region is pointing fingers at Israel. 6 Iranian operatives were also killed. Israel now claiming that,
Well, Israel says it's very strangely, we didn't target you, but it's kind of ridiculous because if they didn't know that this Iranian general was there, then it's an intelligence failure. And if they did, the Iranians are saber-rattling and Israel rushes to say, oh, no, we didn't mean to get you.
But in the meantime, interesting, the Lebanese press, another headline here, also from Beirut, which talks about there was an Lebanese papers were saying that what was really allegedly going on was a plan to foil Iran's efforts to build a network of sort of Druze empowerment against Israeli interests. It was reported in An Nahar and talked about also the Daily Star Beirut. So again, I think it's let's just say it's murky, and it's also it's an ethnic melting pot up there as well, and we know that there's Israel has treated Syrian victims of violence on the Israeli side of the border. The Druze, of course, are generally thought of as being pro-Israel, but the Druze are not just in Israel. There's also in Lebanon.
Right.
Wow.
No, I'm stopping everybody for a second because, as we mentioned, a suspected stabbing attack in Tel Aviv earlier this morning, approximately an hour ago, very close to actually where we're sitting here right now. We are joined now by Danny Swibel, I-24 News correspondent, at the scene at the bus station where approximately an hour ago a stabbing incident reported as a terror attack occurred. Danny, what are you seeing on the ground?
Well, currently police have reopened the road. This is a major junction in central Tel Aviv, and so they wanted the traffic to continue. Just about 400 meters away is where the perpetrator ran off the bus and was eventually shot in the leg by actually police that were just passing through. They happened to see him running, and they got off and apprehended him. Several people were running for their lives. There was an eyewitness report saying that they were behind the bus. They saw people getting off the bus. People were screaming. We have reports that the bus driver actually got into an altercation with the terrorist and maybe was able to perhaps save lives. As it stands, the number of dead or number of injured is currently up in the air a bit. We have reports now that 17 people are injured. 6 are believed to be serious, with 2 in a nearby hospital here in Tel Aviv that are believed to be in critical condition. The cleanup crew has just completed cleaning up some of the blood on the ground. And again, as I said, security forces here are trying to let traffic go through. And it's almost an hour later, as if nothing has happened here on the scene.
Remember, that's, I think the power and strength of Tel Aviv, one of the major the major metropolitan in Israel. Danny Swibel, thank you for joining us from the scene. As we mentioned, an attack earlier today. Hamas has not taken responsibility for this attack, but praised it as a valiant and heroic act. Again, a modus operandi we've seen after lone wolf attacks in Jerusalem over the course of the last several months, attacking Israeli civilians. Palestinian organizations such as Hamas do not take responsibility, but praise the attack. And as we update you throughout the morning, we're moving along now. Moving along to Davos as the day continues. Also in the news, billionaires and politicians gathering in Davos, Switzerland this week for the World Economic Forum will come under pressure to tackle rising inequality after a study published by Oxfam has found that based on current trends, by next year, 2016, the richest 1% of the world's population will own more than half of the world's wealth. I'm going to say that again. Next year, 1% of the world's population will own more than half of the world's wealth, according to an Oxfam report. Now, to try and break the staggering announcement, along with other topics that are on the summit's agenda, we are joined in studio by I-24 senior news editor Ruthie Sinai. Good morning to you, Ruthie.
Good morning.
Tony's still with us, of course, to try and figure out what we're all going to live on. But first, let's listen to what Oxfam Global Head Policy Max Lawson had to say yesterday.
What we need is a politics that is influenced by the 99% and not by the 1%. We think that's possible, and it's happening as we speak. In countries like Brazil, for instance, are becoming more equal. So it's not a bad story everywhere. Some of the world's billionaires really feel that the situation that we're in at the moment is out of control. So someone like Warren Buffett, one of the richest men on earth, he says it's crazy that he pays the same effective tax rate or lower effective tax rate than his cleaner or his secretary. There are quite a few of the richest people at Davos are saying similar things to Oxfam. But there are many others at Davos who disagree with us. So there's a big debate to be had. But we think we have to take that debate to Davos, to the billionaires of the world, Because let's face it, what kind of world do they want to live in? Do they want to live in a world where they have to be scared to walk down the street, where they have to live behind barbed wire? In countries like South Africa, where they're some of the most unequal places on the planet, rich people are unhappy, they live shorter lives, and they live in fear. Clear message that governments should take away from them.
Joining us from London is research advisor at Oxfam, who wrote the report in question, Wealth, Having It All and Wanting More, Deborah Hardoon. Deborah, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. First of all, how did this conclude? How did you reach this conclusion?
Well, last year, in the lead up to Davos, we highlighted the fact that a very small number of billionaires had the same amount of wealth as half of the population of the planet. So that was the 85 stat that got quoted all around the world. We wanted to see this year in what direction inequality was moving, so whether or not it was the world was getting more unequal or less. And so we looked at the trends, and particularly since 2010, it was really clear from the data that we used from Forbes lists of billionaires and Credit Suisse that wealth inequality is indeed getting much worse. And if we continue on the trends that we've seen over the last few years, then indeed the top 1% will have more wealth than the rest of us combined.
Right. Deborah, stay with us. In the short time we have, Ruthie Sinai, senior news editor for I-24 News. Davos is going to be dealing with so many issues this year.
Yeah.
Can this even be pushed to the top priority?
It can be, but it sort of doesn't matter. I mean, Davos has been going on for 7-8 years now, and this World Economic Forum, this annual glitzy gathering of cocktail parties and shopping and what have you, and mingling. And in fact, as Deborah mentioned, the inequality just keeps growing. And, somebody, I don't know if it was Oxfam, but somebody figured out that if you take all this wealth that's in the hands of the 1% and you divide it by all the world's, citizens, you'd have everybody with an extra $56,000 a year. So in a world where the vast majority lives on $1.50 a year, $1.50 a day, that is pretty staggering.
No, it's a staggering number, but and Deborah, I'm asking you now: is this reversible? I mean, the report, the statement coming out of it, the conclusion is terrifying. Is it reversible, Deborah? I think we may have.
I can answer that it's reversible only if governments are willing to do what's needed to do, and that is to increase taxation on the very wealthy. Because that's what Obama talked about in his State of the Union, and that's what people, even mega billionaires like Warren Buffett, have said. That it's ridiculous that he pays proportionately less taxes than all his workers do. On the amount of money that he has. So one solution is, of course, people like Gates and Buffett, who have decided to, bequeath their most of their money to charity, which is great. And the other has to be dealt with through taxation. There really is no other way. And the question is there a political will to do it?
Is there political will to do it? And also on the agenda, Deborah, really quickly to you, is Oxfam going to try and push this to the top as a top priority there? And, what will be done to try and, have the billionaires swinging their glasses of champagne discuss this matter?
Absolutely. Winnie from Oxfam is now co-chairing Davos this year, so we've got a great opportunity to really promote this as an issue that needs to be a top priority for people that are in leading business and global positions to really take this very seriously. Because as quite rightly was mentioned, it really needs political will, and it needs some real commitment from people in positions of power to take this very seriously. And it's not just as simple as policies on taxation or public services, but it's about making sure that overall governments are much more responsive to ordinary people and less responsive to people in positions of power and wealth.
Amen to that, Deborah. Really, on that optimistic hope, I would love to see that happen. As we're not sitting in Davos here, I think Tony, Ruthie, and I thank you for that interesting and very fascinating report. Thank you, everybody, for being with me in studio. Of course, now we go first to the news. Stay with us as we come back in 10 minutes. Good morning, I-24 News Morning Edition on this morning of breaking news, a terror attack, a stabbing attack in Tel Aviv. in a bus in a Tel Aviv bus station in southern Tel Aviv, very close to where we're sitting here. You're looking at pictures of the aftermath, presumably 3 people injured, one of them critically. Hamas praised the attack in Tel Aviv as a valiant and heroic act. An official of Hamas, Izzat al-Rish, called it a natural response to the occupation and terrorist crimes against our people. The number of victims seriously injured in the stabbing attack continues to rise and now stands at 6 of a total of 15 stabbed. Members of the Israeli prison service accompanying prisoners at Tel Aviv courthouse stopped the terrorist that boarded a bus in Tel Aviv. But the people who are wounded, the citizens who were wounded in this attack, are currently in hospital. We've been telling you details as they were trickling along throughout the morning. And first, let's go to Ichilov Hospital, where we are joined on the phone by Dr. Itzhak Eliaz. Dr. Itzhak Eliaz of Ichilov Hospital to give us the latest information about the people attacked, the people injured, in this attack this morning in Tel Aviv. Dr. Eliaz, good morning to you. What is the hospital dealing with this morning?
Good morning. So far, we've received 9 casualties. 3 of them are severely injured. One is undergoing surgery at the moment. And the 2 other severely injured casualties are considered stable, at the moment at least. We have another 6 casualties. One of them is moderately injured. He has a neck injury, and the others have minor injuries or stress reaction.
And Dr. Eliaz Miller, you are the director of the emergency services at Ichilov Hospital. I know details are very slim at this point, but you mentioned that one person is being operated on right now. We believe, we're saying that we believe right now that is possibly the bus driver. But when we're looking at the injuries, they're all stabbing wounds?
Yes, all of the injuries are stabbing wounds, yes. Lacerations and stabs.
Laceration, stabs, and garnered from that information, just looking at the wounds, and again, I'm speaking in theory right now, so supposedly a very large knife that was used on the passengers of that bus?
I can't tell you any, I don't know any details about the size of the knife or the depth of the injuries. For that matter. Sorry.
But let me recap with you again. You said one person critically injured and is being operated on right now?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Eli?
There's another important detail. There's the phone number for the information center that anyone who's looking for a relative or a possible casualty can call the information center. The number is 1255-133.
1255-133. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. We're going to try and put that on the screen for anybody watching in Tel Aviv, in the region, this morning, and is looking for assistance. And Dr. Eliaz, thank you very much for joining us this morning from Ichilov Hospital. Ruthie Sinai, I-24 News senior news editor, as we mentioned, an attack. And with the few details that we are hearing this morning, I mean, that sounds like an incredibly staggering incident for the people on that bus. What happened exactly?
Okay,
what do we know?
Here's the thing. People are going to work in the morning. It's rush hour. Guy gets on, stabs the bus driver. Bus driver, of course, kind of tries to get control of the bus. He's fairly, as we heard, I think he's critically injured. Tries to open the door, is unable to open the door. Meanwhile, the assailant, the terrorist, it turns out that he's a Palestinian, 22 years old, from the West Bank. He starts running up and down the bus, stabbing people who are sitting in their seats. People are trying to get off the bus. Obviously panic. The bus driver is trying to open the doors, can't open the doors. Meanwhile, and finally some other passenger manages to open the doors and people are pouring out. Meanwhile, it's sort of comic if it weren't so sad. Behind this bus, there is a transport of prisoners who are being taken to court. The driver of the vehicle, of the prison services vehicle, notices there's something wrong with the bus. It's shaking back and forth, and it's kind of veering, along the road. Right. The bus has finally come to a halt at this point. The prison service people, get out of the car, leaving one person to guard the prisoners, start chasing the assailant who has in the meantime gotten off the bus. They chase him. This is a very busy street in central Tel Aviv. They chase him. Some other people join pedestrians, picking up all sorts of iron rods and stuff, trying to chase this guy. The guy is running fairly fast. They shout at him to stop. He doesn't stop. They shoot him in the leg. He goes down. is arrested.
No, is arrested, and as we mentioned throughout the broadcast, is being interrogated right now.
Right.
The few details that we know about the assailant, he is a Palestinian from Tulkarem.
Which is, we need to explain it, very near the Israeli border and the West Bank. 22, he came into Israel illegally, apparently, several days ago. Police are trying to figure out if he had accomplices. At first, they cordoned off that whole area, causing massive traffic jams, of course, and trying to look for anybody who might have driven him to the site, who might have in any way helped him. As far as I know, they haven't caught anybody, but that's not entirely updated. So
no, definitely, we're looking at these lone wolf attacks that have been happening. And this time,
and by the way, police said they had no advance warning.
I mean, there's one question that we asked Mickey Rosenfeld at the beginning of this broadcast was if there was any specific intelligence, if there was any information, which we're used to, sadly, as civilians of this region, that sometimes, heighten the learned insecurity. But at the same time, nothing was actually relayed. We are also joined now live from the scene itself of this attack that happened approximately an hour and a half ago in Tel Aviv, in southern Tel Aviv, by I-24 News correspondent Danny Swibel. Danny, security in and around where you're at right now?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of security here, and just behind me, you could see these are some of the soldiers that actually were responsible for apprehending the terrorist. They were actually driving through. They're part of a prison brigade, and they saw a bit of a commotion. They saw people running all directions. They were able to assess that something very serious was happening. They actually chased the terrorist about 400 meters from where he did the initial stabbings on the bus, and they shot in the direction of his legs. They were actually able to get him in the leg, and he was still alive. They were able to apprehend him and handcuff him, and I'm sure you've shown images of the man who is originally from Tulkarem, believed to be 23 years old, who was being arrested by them. And now the scene is starting to clear. We just saw the cleanup crew about 20 minutes ago finish up because there were trails of blood still on the ground, fresh from the scene. And we are waiting to get exact updates of the 17 who are reported injured. We know 4 are seriously injured, 2 are believed to be in critical condition and are currently being operated on. And we're just starting to hear reports of the bus driver's heroics to save some of the passengers. He got into a scuffle with the terrorist, and actually it was reported to have used pepper spray on him to slow him down, which might have been the factor to have the terrorist, run from the bus and try to elude the scene. And as it stands, again, we're waiting to hear reports of how people are healing from their wounds earlier today.
Now, Danny Swibel, I-24 News correspondent, describe to us, because where you're standing at right now is one of the busiest junctions in Tel Aviv. It's also one where many buses go out of. It's on the way to the Kriya, which is the Israeli, one can refer to it as the headquarters of the military of the Israeli Defense Forces in Tel Aviv. How many people are there usually?
I mean, typically, yes, this is a very busy intersection. The intersections are always filled with dozens of people. But once the scene broke, there were hundreds of people on the scene, all trying to get a glimpse of what was going on. And the scene was still fresh. So many people, as they were looking on, were perhaps still susceptible to the continuing going on scene. So, again, we have reports that somebody was behind the bus in their car. They saw people run off the bus screaming. They recognized that there was something perhaps dangerous happening. They locked their doors, and luckily they were not part of the crime scene. They saw the terrorist run past them, again, who was apprehended about 400 meters from where the bus had stood.
Wow. And then Ruthie Sinai here for the question to you.
Danny, do you know if police have been able to pick up or determine if there were any accomplices, or was he acting on his own?
As it stands, it seems like he is working alone. We do have reports that Hamas has praised the attack, but we are still waiting for reports to hear if he worked alone. As it stands, he is one of these lone wolf soldiers, if you will, lone wolf attackers, and the police are currently investigating the scene and seeing where we stand with this.
Right. Danny Swibel from the scene, I-24 News correspondent, staying there to update us throughout the morning. This is the aftermath of an attack this morning in Tel Aviv, in a very busy bus station, on a bus in Tel Aviv by a young Palestinian from Tulkarem, supposedly. We're also joined on the phone right now by Mickey Rosenfeld, chief spokesperson for the Israeli police. Mickey, good morning to you. What do we know at this stage of the day?
The investigation is continuing. The main suspect is being held by Israeli police after he was shot in the leg as he fled the scene, and after he stabbed altogether 13 people. We're obviously looking to see if he arrived in the area on his own or if he came into the Tel Aviv area with other Palestinians.
but we've confirmed he's a 23-year-old from Tulkarem, and altogether 13 people were taken to hospital, 4 in serious conditions, 3 in moderate, and a further 6 in light condition.
And when you say that you're looking to see if he came in with other people, I mean, we are hearing reports that he supposedly came in from Bat Yam. Correct me in a second if I am wrong. And also, intelligence-wise, information about this, was there anything?
We're looking, first of all, at the main route where he came in from, if he came in directly from Tulkarem overnight, or whether he was in the area from the early hours of the morning. That's first of all. Second of all, there was no specific intelligence that we had received about a terrorist attack that was going to take place in Tel Aviv today. But when a lone terrorist takes advantage of the fact that he makes his way into Tel Aviv or any other major city and uses a knife to stab innocent people, obviously the response time is very important, and our main emphasis was there as the response units of both the Israeli police and emergency teams to give medical treatment was quick.
Now, when you say, I'm assuming that Tel Aviv right now under heightened security, is there any information that anybody entered with him, and how much security is now spread around and across the biggest metropolitan in Israel, Tel Aviv?
Extra police units now in the Tel Aviv area, backup units have also come in, special patrol units, where the investigation is continuing to see how he got in that area. And security assessments are also being made at the same time in Jerusalem at the police headquarters.
The police headquarters. Miki Rosenfeld, thank you for being with us on the phone today as we're updating throughout the morning and throughout the day on I-24 News the terror attack, the terror stabbing attack that Hamas praised already. Again, it's important to mention Hamas did not take responsibility. The Palestinian group Hamas did not take responsibility for the attack earlier this morning in Tel Aviv that has injured approximately 9 people, 9 to 15, some of them in critical condition. But as we are looking at this as a modus operandi of lone wolf, and I'm joined in studio also by Daniel Ziri, with me also Ruthie C9. I think it's important to mention to our viewers that when something like this happens in Tel Aviv, it has a different meaning.
Of course.
Okay, how so?
Well, obviously, as you said, it's the biggest metropolitan area in Israel. This is happening right by, the defense, kind of the Pentagon, Israel's Pentagon, as it were. Very, very busy. The financial capital. Right. A lot of people coming in from the suburbs into the city. The city's population itself isn't so big, but about 1.5 million people coming in every day into the city.
And in many ways, because it doesn't have, and I'm asking you this because it doesn't have religious undertones or overtones. Mm-hmm. It sometimes is even more, significant because
and people are in Israel, unlike Jerusalem perhaps, and Tel Aviv, people are more relaxed about these things. It's not this sort of thing in Jerusalem. You hear about stabbings. I mean, unfortunately, every day. Well, not every day, but
as a lone wolf attacks. Right?
Yeah, but in Tel Aviv, it's not this. The last attack was in November 10th. I looked it up before, and it was a soldier who was stabbed to death, unfortunately, near a train station. But it's not an everyday occurrence. It's still fairly unusual, which is another reason why it kind of creates shock
and residents in Tel Aviv. We always talk about the Tel Aviv bubble. People live here through wars and everything that's going on north, south. But in Tel Aviv, it seems that it's a little bit sheltered, and when something like this happens, it brings everyone back to reality.
Well, we're also hearing already reactions from the political arena. We have to remind people we are within the 60 days leading up to the Israeli elections on March 17th. Yitzhak Herzog, who's the leader of the Labour Party, one of the leaders of the Labour Party, running to depose, so to speak, Prime Minister Netanyahu, says that there is no sense of security in the country now. I believe that the Israeli Foreign Minister has also reacted already. Lieberman, I'm trying really quickly in the time that we have. Sadly, the incidents we've been seeing over the course of the last 2 days, we've seen, heightened security up in the north because of a suspected Israeli attack on Hezbollah militants in Syria, and the army spread out there. And this, how do you think, Ruthie, this will affect the election campaigns in Israel?
Well, 60 days is a long time in the Middle East and certainly in Israel. People, you've got, the reactions, the initial reactions, of course, are all from the far right, saying, the left wing has blood on its hands, blaming various and sundry.
We're hearing reports also that Naftali Bennett, who's right to the right of the dial, has already said that Abu Mazen is responsible for this attack.
Abu cousin and other people. Look, it's kind of sad to say, but again, you take these reactions, out of the drawer every time, and you kind of dangle them, and then it goes away. It's hard to say how it's going to affect. If it were much nearer the elections, it'd be different.
There were already in Israeli television, Israeli press this morning talking about how this is going to affect, like you said, the elections. Is it going to bring the security issue back to the front of the scene, back to the agenda, back to the list of priorities of Israeli leaders?
Right, and which seems to be actually the rhetorical line, security, but sadly this morning it's hard to argue with that. And again, Tel Aviv attack this morning, about 2 hours ago, an assailant, a Palestinian resident of Tulkarm, boards a bus in Tel Aviv, stabs several people, one of them in very critical condition under operation right now. The assailant has been shot by Israeli security forces. He's being interrogated. I-24 News will update you throughout the day with the aftermath of this attack in Tel Aviv, a stabbing attack. Do stay with us. Thank you for being with us this morning.